Hi, Gary Stearman. It is Monday, February the 8th, and it's time for another commentary from Prophecy Watchers. Let's look again at the Middle East, particularly the situation in Syria. You know, the prophecy concerning Syria, or actually prophecies plural, have preoccupied us for years as we've watched a number of things transpire. Back when there was still an Iraq and a Saddam Hussein, and back when there was still an Osama bin Laden, and we all speculated, and virtually I think all Bible scholars felt that Bashar al-Assad was essentially going to drop out of power. Well, he's back. He is in complete agreement with what the Russians are doing. There's an air base in northwestern Syria, right on the Mediterranean coast. It's called Khmeimi Air Force Base. It's running 24/7 bombing runs to an area in northern Syria near Aleppo. And let me read from Debka file today. The 5-year Syrian war faces its most critical moment. Last Saturday, February 6th, the combined force of Syrian army and Hezbollah troops and an Iraqi Shiite militia under Iranian officers were led by Russian air and Spetsnaz officers. Spetsnaz is a Russian word that means special forces. It sort of corresponds to our special forces. Pressing forward to encircle 35,000 rebels trapped in Aleppo, the country's largest city. Aleppo is up north in Syria. As they tightened the siege, 400,000 Syrian civilians were also trapped and forced to bear heavy Russian air bombardment and savage artillery fire from the ground forces closing in on the city. Rebel supply routes were cut off last Thursday and Friday, when Syria and Hezbollah forces captured what's called the Azaz corridor, a kind of an escape path. And of course, the poor citizens of Syria are caught. They are trapped. If they flee into Turkey, that's a problem. Many of them are unable to cross the border into Turkey to escape to the north. And the Russians, and this is the important part of the story to me, the Russians are there in force. By the way, the Khmeimi Air Force Base in northern Syria is not the only source of bombing. There's also an air base built by the Russians for the specific purpose of takeoffs and landings of fighters and bombers, and it's near Damascus in the south of Syria. And so that's the situation. We have, in essence, a deal between the president, if you will, the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and Vladimir Putin. Go back to Isaiah 17, which we've summed up many times in the light of what's going on in Syria, and it's called the burden of Damascus. And let me tell you, Damascus is headquarters right now for the whole plot to control the Middle East. The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city and shall be a ruinous heap. That hasn't happened. We've been looking at this for years. We have all but predicted that it would happen on several occasions, but I've never seen the fighting as fierce and serious as it is right now in Syria. There's going to be a battle that encompasses not only Syria, but the territory to the south of Syria, because the very next verse in Isaiah says, the cities of Aroer are forsaken, and they shall be for flocks. In other words, there's going to be some kind of a cataclysmic bombing there, and that bombing is going to reach south from Aleppo, Damascus, going all the way down to Amman, Jordan, which corresponds to the cities of Aroer here. In other words, we're talking about a huge area. Reading this story from today's Bloomberg News, the headline is, Advantage Assad After 5 Years of War in Syria. After 5 years of war and 250,000 dead, that's 250,000 people, most of them innocent bystanders, most of them fleeing for their lives, many of them killed by poison gas. President Bashar al-Assad and his Russian and Iranian allies now have the upper hand in Syria. Now, I wanted to point out there, the Iranians are in on this thing too. You may remember the recent nuclear treaty that we signed. Actually, it was an unsigned agreement, and the Iranians said that we will be nice people. We will not develop nuclear weapons upon the signing of this treaty. Nobody believes that, of course, and what they are now doing is joining forces with Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin, and they are participating in the bombing of northern Syria. President Bashar al-Assad and his Russian and Iranian allies now have the upper hand in Syria. They're seeking to drive home a growing battlefield rather than negotiate. You get that? First paragraph, Bloomberg News. The battle is not easing up in any way, shape, or form, but rather it is being intensified with the goal of control. In the past week, the United Nations has tried to get peace talks underway in Geneva, and European leaders met in London to seek ways to halt the refugee influx that's creating political havoc all across the European continent, but those events looked like sideshows compared to the action unfolding in northern Syria. Now, here's the thing. You've been watching the news lately? How much do you see about the war that's going on in northern Syria? How many shots do you see of Russian bombers taking off and coming back without the bombs under their wings? In short, what do you see being reported about this war? Practically nothing. And yet thousands of people are dying. Territory is being solidified for the purpose of the true assault that they all want to wage against Israel. Once they have Syria, what the remains of what used to be Iraq, and the territory all the way up to the Euphrates River, the Iranians, the Russians, and the Syrians can join and freely move south into Israel. And believe me, that is their plan. And I know that the Israelis are very conscious of this. Gains by Assad and his allies in the past month have squeezed overland supply lines to Turkey that may represent the last bulwark against defeat for the rebels in northern Syria. Tens of thousands of refugees have already fled toward Turkey, which is hosting German Chancellor Angela Merkel. That's today to discuss the crisis. So the German Chancellor Angela Merkel has joined the fray. You remember, she's been welcoming refugees into Germany by the thousands, much to the dismay of the German people. She's taking pity on those fleeing from this battle. Russian air power is, quote, allowing Assad forces to advance against previously formidable foes. And so Bashar al-Assad, Vladimir Putin, and the Iranians have got a three-way deal going, and the rebel resistance is being wiped out. Friends, the rebel resistance, many of them, by the way, Christians, the rebel resistance is the side that we should be on, and we are not. The regime has achieved a decisive advantage in Aleppo. In other words, Aleppo is about to fall. Isaiah 17, the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Right now, exactly the opposite thing is happening. Right now, the Syrians are consolidating the power with the Russians and the Iranians, and Damascus looks like a stronghold. That's not what the Bible says. In fact, Isaiah 17 talks about an invasion that comes on the heels of what we're seeing right now. And Isaiah 17:13 says, the nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters. God shall rebuke them, they shall flee far off and be chased like the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and a rolling thing before the whirlwind, and behold, at eveningtide trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. At some point, says Isaiah, Damascus is going to be smashed in a 24-hour war. Get the wording. At eveningtide trouble, before morning he is not. That's a very quick war. But the thing that absolutely amazes me right now is the lack of news coverage in this whole thing. It's as though this war just doesn't matter. And yet, what's at stake? What's at stake is the nation of Israel, already fighting against the Gazans, the PLO, fighting Hezbollah to the north, soon be fighting the forces of Vladimir Putin and the Iranians, just as prophesied by Ezekiel. But that's another story. Keep watching the news. This is of biblical proportions, to say the least. I'm Gary Stearman. Pray for those Christians trapped in this incredible war in Syria. Pray for their peace, their safety. Pray that they might be able to escape to peaceful territory somehow. Keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.